The Finance Committee meeting for April 24th will come to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Lear?
Present.
Mr. Legess? Mr. Washington?
Present.
Mr. Olthoff? Mr. Hess?
Present.
Mr. Byrne?
Present.
Ms. Weber?
Present.
Mr. Payton?
Present.
Ms. Parker?
Present.
Mr. Kinzinger? Mr. Zenz?
Present.
Ms. Haas?
Present.
Mr. Swanson?
Present.
Ms. Zucolo? Mr. Dennell? Mr. Wheeler?
Present.
Mr. Seroy?
Present.
We have a quorum.
I have no request for public comment, or is there any desire for public comment? Seeing no desire for public comment, we have no presentations. The minutes have been distributed. Is there a motion to approve the minutes for March 27th? Mr. Payton moves, Mr. Burns seconds. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We'll move to the Treasurer's Office, Mr. Afcano. Good morning.
Good morning.
You have the information in your packet. Where would you like to go?
I just, I guess briefly, tax bills will be going out first part of May. They'll be due on the 13th of June, the first installment. Second installment, I believe, is September 5th. So they'll be in the mail probably by the 4th or 5th of November. And just we wanted everybody to know that doing some early collections that we've been doing with the new program, and we had the 4 payment plan in place last year as well. We've taken in just a little over $1 million so far this year, so we're pleased by that, and we, hopefully it grows. And the more that grows, the more it smooths out our workload and cash flow and other things. Besides that, I've been out for about the last week, so I'm happy to be back. I can't see this side of the room, but other than that, life is good. And Mr. Wheeler looks very handsome today. I just thought I'd mention that. Like the way I teed that up for him, Andy? Put it right up for him. That's all I have. Any questions?
We have a treasurer's report and collector's report monthly resolutions. Can we have a motion to combine and approve? Mr. Altoff, Mr. Washington seconds. Any discussion on approving the report? Hearing no discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Finance Department, Mr. McCarty. You have the packet available. You can start to peruse some of the miscellaneous financial reports and discussion. Will be open. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. I have update information for you this morning. We'll let you know that our 2018 CAFR report will be here for review at the May meeting, and we'll try to get that out to you as soon as it's available to do so for your review. We do have a May 31st deadline with the SEC reporting for the bond website for bond investors called EMMA, amongst other reporting requirements. So we'll be moving that along here soon, so we'll have that for your review. We'll start out with the miscellaneous update reports. Start out, I think everybody was curious, put the inmate and detainee bed rental revenue page first. Well, I'm not sure in the packet where it's located at.
That's first.
Okay. to show the change. As the sheriff mentioned last month, that it was going to start in March. You can see that change evident there in the month-by-month trend.
Used to have. Any questions on any of the various revenues?
So for the most part, we're seeing positive trend this month, and in all of our these regular reports. So unless anybody has any questions, I won't spend any other much time on it. Yeah.
All right, then let's move to cash flow update.
Yeah, I want to preface the this cash flow update. We're heading into what will be our normal. You know, it has been our normal, and will be the lowest cash on hand time coming up, approximately around the May 10th payroll. But to preface this, we're sitting today with before this week's payroll at about $3.5 million, and to put that in perspective, just a few years ago, after our TAWs hit, we had one in December, and then we started in January getting the TAWs. That was our dollar amount balance after the TAW deposit, and we had to basically survive between December and May to June area with $3.5 million and make that stretch. So coming into having to make $3.5 million stretch for a few weeks as compared to 4 or 5 months is so much better. So I preface that, and I can say it with a smile, actually. So, yeah, the pressure comparison is not even a comparison at this point. So, you know, and likewise, the accounts payable, because of we had to manage that amount of money for so long, the accounts payable is always the highest when you get to late April and May because of after the 3 payrolls. And so our highest, you know, if you look at the end of March, 845,000 approximately was in the system as the snapshot at the end of the month. We saw as high as 3.8 million in the system as of its highest time a few years ago. And that's why the vendors, it got stretched out, it grew, and it stretched out to 120 plus days. So we're currently heading into these few weeks still at 30 to 45 days in our normal vendors of and we have, you know, per statute 60 days, you know, a 60-day window, so we're well within our limitation. And you know, if we, depending on timing, you know, cash flow, the snapshot, what happens during the month is sometimes different than the snapshot, you know, as of the end of the month. You know, if we do have to, we may get to 60 for a few weeks if timing happens, you know, as far as when the deposits actually hit, but it'll just be for a very short period of time. And then as Nick alluded to, he's been gracious enough to do early property tax distributions once the property tax bills are printed and available to be mailed out. So he's done 3 million in the past. We have 2 million plugged in, so that's an improvement as far as, you know, looking at additional help, you know, until we get into the full distribution period in July and beyond. So so many areas of improvement to discuss, but for disclosure, we are flowing through what may be, you know, our lowest time frame here around the May 10th payroll, but it'll be a very short-lived situation, and it's mainly about timing. You know, we get about 30% of our deposits between the 1st and the 15th of the month, and 70% of our deposits from the 16th to the end of the month. So That's why, you know, sometimes the early part, when that's the first payroll hits in that first section, we can, you know, sometimes see the lowest cash flow timing. So just disclosure, sharing that this, you know, may be the last time we have to talk about numbers this low from a cash perspective as things continue to improve, and we're seeing improvements every day. So I don't want to, you know, put too much of a negative spin other than just to share, you know, what the situation is as we're coming into it here, so that all of you are aware, you know, of what the actual situation is. And it's, you know, far greater. The improvement is just, yeah, I'm still smiling. So even then we're having to talk about it. So, so just an update on that. I don't know if there's any questions specifically on this. I may, on the April estimate, I'm on fiscal year 2019 on the cash flow, April 2019 estimated. The inmate, the bed rental, the transport, we received 2 of our DHS payments early April. So as we are now fully caught up with when the federal government shut down and everybody getting back up to speed. So those payments actually, 2 of those payments from previous months actually landed in early April. And then you add in the current amount, that's why that number is so large. So, and then we'll go to approximately, you know, what the estimate is at this point. Looking forward, and we'll continue to watch all that, as well as watching everything, and, you know, continually update this on trend going forward. But that's why really the bed rental transport line is kind of up and down, because it all is related to when the feds shut down, and then when those timing of those payments actually got caught back up. So
If there are no questions, we'll move on then to the PTEL report. Now, we have some new members on the committee, so we may want to give some background too.
Ready? Yeah, this PTEL report, I just wanted to update you. You know, the last time we talked about property tax, it was at the levy request. It was back in, I believe, September. And, you know, those dollar amounts are plugged into the budget, and then it goes through.
PTEL stands for?
Property tax extension.
The purpose of it.
Limitation model. Yeah, that's basically our tax cap.
Okay.
That's what it's also commonly referred to. You know, a lot of this information, specifically have questions that probably best to talk to Eric Blair or Dan Hendrickson. It originates in the assessor's office, gets to the county clerk's office, and then ends up in the treasurer's office when the tax bills go out. So this, as the information goes through, you know, then we relook at the amounts for the budget, and it goes through the process. You know, there's a review process, board of review process, and, you know, coming out. So sometimes what the original estimates can change depending on the board of review, but so everything is very similar to what we budgeted, and the highest percentage as we identified when we did the levy request was for VAC, which got an 8.2% year-over-year change from the tax year 2017 to this one, tax year 2018 collected in 2019. Yeah, I'm not sure how much did you want me to go through, like the calculations, or just
if there are questions on it,
or,
otherwise
yeah, if there's any
probably wouldn't be
specific
necessary.
questions on this.
And either talking directly to Eric Blair or Dan Hendrickson, if you've got some questions, or they would be reporting to the Community Service Committee, so you could come to Community Services with questions also. Are there questions on this? Seeing no questions, we'll move on.
I didn't have any, had none of the claims recommended, but I understand there may be one that you guys, that there may be one here for the committee's review.
All right, we have a claim here that came from the auditor's office, from Jake Lee. Mr. Chairman,
Motion to approve the claim.
there's a motion to approve the claim. A second by Mr. Swanson. Any questions on the motion? This is a conference that Mr. Lee attended, and I think his practice is that he requests the Finance Committee approve all his claims rather than him just submitting them without any suggestions. So that's why this has been brought to our attention. Hearing no questions, all in favor of the motion to approve, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We didn't need a voice vote on that.
Mr. Lear?
Do we need a roll call on that? All right. We'll need a roll call then.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Olthoff? Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Mr. Byrne?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Regis?
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Ms. Parker? Mr. Kinzinger? Mr. Zenz?
Aye.
Ms. Haas? Mr. Swanson? Mr. Dennell? Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Mr. Olthoff.
I'm sure there were other bills. Why isn't this included with the whole, you know, the motel bill and the mileage bill, and why isn't that all one claim? Why?
I can't address this. I know sometimes
Why is it kept separate?
I don't have that information. Mr. Wheeler, maybe?
Thank you. I guess there's probably two answers. I can guesstimate that the hotel is part of it, part of the registration. Sometimes that is the case for these conferences. The other thing is it comes here because the auditor can't approve his own bills. He can't audit his own work, if that makes sense.
All right.
So we have to check in to make sure all the substantiation and documentation, this came up in a previous meeting, so we're
Okay.
sending it to somebody else. As long as somebody else okays it, he prefers it's his committee.
If there's nothing more, we'll go on to the Sheriff's Department. Thank you, Mr. McCarty. Oh,
I did have some questions for Mr. McCarty.
okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had to kind of ask you a couple of questions about a situation that came up around year-end close. And sorry I didn't alert you before he started to let Steve get away from us. But it had to do with the changes that we do to the budget every year. At the end of the year, we do take our contingency budget, if you will, and fill the holes. If somebody's slightly over budget, we tend to fill in those budget holes. You know, that's kind of what it's there for. People are not required to spend to the dime what they're allocated. We want them to get as close as possible. And is that, Steve, that's correct? We do that from year to year? Okay.
Yes.
So specifically this year, and I go back to the situation from December where we had the executive meeting and then the finance committee meeting on the same day, if you remember that, where we adjusted the auditor's budget down to zero because of the bonus payout situation where he wanted to give that employee a bonus of what was left in his budget. So we brought that down to zero. So we made those budget changes, but am I correct in saying that there were more expenses that came in that made him over budget at that point?
That's
Right
correct.
at the end of the year? Okay. And then just, this has come back up again, and I want to make sure the committee remembers, you know, what happened for those members who weren't on the board then. We took a snapshot of what we thought, where his budget was that morning, actually. And the auditor didn't present anything to us at the meeting, at the finance committee meeting, which he chose not to attend, but didn't present anything saying that he had more expenses coming in, so we let that ride that day and adjusted the budget. The question that I had was we had those expenses come in and made him over budget, but then we also received some reimbursements from 911, which they give us for doing their auditing work, for doing their finance work, and for doing their payroll. That's a regular thing that always happens, usually on a monthly or quarterly basis. I don't know how frequently. Is that correct?
Monthly, yeah.
And so we allocate those percentage-wise to different departments. And so when those were allocated by the treasurer's office, by Diana, she put the normal amounts in, and then she went on vacation for a week. Is that correct? She was on vacation for maybe a week or more.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that did not zero out the over budget for the auditor's office. So Steve came to me and he said, hey, you know, he's still over budget in the auditor's office. What do you want me to do? And I said, take a small portion of what went into finance and plug that hole so he's not over budget. And so Steve did a journal voucher and moved that money over to zero out that budget. And I want to make sure the finance committee knows that was done with the authority vested in me, because it didn't change the final number of the budget. It just moved money between one fund and another. It's come up because the auditor had went to our outside auditors who are doing the audit right now and raised the question, and thought it was something that was, I wasn't there, but maybe misappropriate for them to look into. They did an internal mini investigation, if you will, talked to Steve, talked to Anita, talked to me, and it was determined that by the outside auditor, it wasn't anything that was egregious, anything that was systematic, anything that was illegal, well within our purview. And they went and talked to the auditor, and he said that he agreed that it wasn't systematic or systemic, and there was not a pattern of abuse or any other instance that he could point to where it had happened before. So I want to make sure that this committee knows that, because it has now come up again in recent comments, and it may come up through other avenues through the media. We're being asked questions about this. So I want to give the committee a chance to know this is things that go on behind the scenes all the time. We made one mistake. We didn't put a sticky note on the journal voucher to say, talk to the chairman, we got this straightened out, but it was for the benefit of the auditor's office. So I want to make sure this committee has a chance to ask any questions of us while we're here, because the last thing I want to do is to see any questions that may come out in the media regarding this, because it seems that what we did was fine 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago with everybody, but maybe not fine now. So I want to make sure. And we're here. Steve's here. He can answer any of this.
Are there any questions? Everyone's clear in terms of what happened. Mr. Widow, approximately what kind of dollar amounts were we dealing with?
$200? I mean,
Off the top of my head, I believe I remember $140,
Okay.
yeah,
approximately.
I know it's,
All right. Thank you. That's an important clarification, and if you have further questions, be sure to bring them, and you could even make those questions available at the next meeting if there's something comes to your mind.
and we will, when the outside auditors are here to present the final budget, ask the questions at that point as well. They come in to produce the final budget. They're not of the opinion that this was a substantive issue, that it was something that was going to appear in as an audit finding, because it was a one-off. That wasn't just somebody forgot to write on a sticky note, journal voucher done per okay, Chairman Wheeler. That was it.
Okay.
So
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there anything more that we need in terms of Finance Department? Seeing nothing more, then we will move on. Sheriff? You have the monthly update from the sheriff. Oh, we don't approve that. No. So you can look at that monthly update. Good morning.
Good morning. Steve talked about the numbers from a financial standpoint. I would continue to reiterate that, you know, a lot of this is still driven by our local numbers, which haven't really gone down. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing, but our local numbers seem to be steady right around 260, give or take, depending on the day. After a weekend, we're averaging about 265 through March, as the number says on our sheet that you should have all been emailed prior to the criminal justice meeting. So any questions on that? I think the next thing on the agenda is that SAMHSA.
Yeah, we need a
The drug court grant.
drug court grant.
So back in, I believe it was October, we got awarded what's referred to as a SAMHSA grant. And SAMHSA stands for Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. It is a 5-year grant, $400,000 each year for a total of $2 million over a 5-year period. It is effective through September of 2023. And the majority of those dollars, 80%, approximately 80%, are for contractual health care, drug treatment, and mental health treatment. And one of the things that I think you've heard a lot of people talk about, including our coroner with the opioids and the grants that he's received, a lot of grants that are out there don't involve treatment. And that's problematic because that's what people need. I mean, the education is great, and Bob has done a great job with the education and the training and things like that, but these individuals need treatment. And so this grant, I think, is going to address some of that. It won't cover all of it, but it'll cover some of it. The other 20% of the grant is basically administration costs. So if there's any questions, or Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you need
Mr. Chairman?
to add anything to that.
Well, yeah, this has been a process. We knew we've had it for a while, but being able to gear up for it is been daunting, I guess, because it basically doubles the drug court,
Right.
which is a good thing. Actually, it gets people into treatment and out of jail. But there's a lot of service providers, a lot of paperwork that has to be done. Do you remember the amount? Was it 500 a year, 600 a year, 1,000?
400.
400,000.
400 a year for 5 years.
For 5 years, that was it. Yeah. So it's a substantial commitment, and there's a good chance that will continue after that point. But know that if it ever does get ratcheted back, then we will have to ratchet back that commitment we have. The budget can't support that right now, in as much as we would like to. We couldn't. Maybe down the road we could, but so the ask is we realize we need to put it in front of the committee, because even though we're getting reimbursed, we're going to be spending the money. And so that was kind of an afterthought, like, wow, we need to get the committee to approve this, because we're just trying to say, yes, we want the money from the federal government. So this is somewhat of a formality, but I think everybody sees the value in that.
Yeah, it's very, I mean, just the treatment alone, both drug treatment and mental health treatment, I don't know that the average person out there realizes the lack of mental health treatment that we have available to people who need it. Jails have kind of turned into that quasi mental health facility now, and so this will help a lot with both drug treatment and mental health treatment.
Mr. Hess?
I'll make the motion, we approve it.
All right, motion to approve. Ms. Haas?
I just think that, like I say, before we make,
What?
before we, before we vote on it, the organization that I'm in charge of is subject to receive dollars from this for services, so I will need to abstain when we vote.
All right.
Is there a second?
Is there a second to that motion? Mr. Altoff? Mr. Wheeler?
Yes, one thing I do need to mention is that along with that motion to approve, it also needs to allow the county board chairman to sign the subcontracts with these providers. So that needs to be an assumption made by those who made the motion, because we don't want to have to come back and have each one contract approved.
Mr. Hess, would you? Yep. Mr. Altoff? Yep. All right. Ms. Weber?
Thank you. Do I assume that the grant was awarded last September in 18?
October. It was effective October 1.
So what has happened in the interim is nothing
So in the interim, nothing has happened because we haven't spent any money. So
but putting in place the
trying to get everything, trying to get our ducks in
good.
a row.
That's good.
Any other questions on the motion? Hearing no other questions, this is spending money, so we'll need a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Olthoff,
Aye.
Mr. Hess,
Aye.
Mr. Byrne,
Aye.
Miss Weber,
Aye.
Mr. Payton,
Aye.
Miss Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger,
Aye.
Mr. Zenz, Miss Haas, Mr. Swanson, Mr. Dennell, Mr. Wheeler.
Aye.
Motion carries.
I have two other things, real quick. The first one, and I think we addressed in the Criminal Justice Committee, but I think this committee should also be aware. We have gone through our third Nakamoto inspection from ICE. The week of, I think it was the week of the 8th or whatever that Monday was, Monday through Wednesday. Nakamoto is a contracted firm that is contracted by ICE to come in and do inspections of facilities across the country who house for ICE. And I can tell you that everything from the start back in 2016, when we really didn't know what we were doing with ICE a whole lot, to now is like night and day. And these inspections, believe it or not, don't even make us nervous anymore. So things went very well. A credit to our jail administration and the correction staff that they have to do this daily, day in and day out. This isn't one of those inspections where you can show them on April 8th that you're doing this. This is something that's got to be documented over the course of the past year. And we were very pleased with what Nakamoto had to say. So credit to them. And lastly, I've talked about this before, but I will bring it up again because we are starting to get some price quotes on our radio system. Our mobile radios in our cars are going to require an upgrade effective January of 2020, along with some of our portable radios. And that is done through CanCom. Motorola has offered the pricing on these are already bid out, and they are also offering financing. So we are getting some financing quotes that we will bring before this committee, hopefully within the next month or maybe two. But I can tell you that what we did, instead of having the coroner's office bring you a quote for their radios and our office bring you a quote for our radios, we did combine them so that we're just doing one payment on a lease instead of two different ones, provided you approve it. So that's all I got.
Any questions on that, Mr. Hess?
Thank you, Chairman. Sheriff, I'm going to put you on the spot. Well, I probably should have mentioned this to you before. But
Yeah, well, that'd have been nice.
would you like to make any comments on what Sheriff Justin Smith had from Colorado for the marijuana and youth? What it did to his local population?
You're right. You did put me on a spot. However, that being said, I think that the most important thing about that is I think our legislators have to look long and hard at, are they doing this for the revenue? Are they doing it to get people to support them because they allowed this legalization, or they're going to allow it if they do? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. All I know is, the advantage we have in Illinois right now is that there's some history there. We know what has been done in Colorado, the effects of it. And if the numbers that they quoted in this symposium, seminar, whatever you want to call it, the fact that for every dollar, and this was a number that they gave us, for every dollar that they brought in revenue, they spent $4 in drug treatment, hospital treatment, car accidents, I'm at a loss. I mean, I don't know where somebody would look at that, where a legislator would look at that and say, hey, what a great idea. It makes no sense to me. Like I said, if it's because they want to tell people, hey, we're bringing in X amount of $1 million because we've in taxes and we're regulating it. Well, they're not regulating it. They don't regulate it. You don't even need a symposium to understand that you can't regulate that. There's still going to be illegal grows. There's still going to be, I mean, the stories were unbelievable what you heard. Now, I'm sure there's another side of those who want to legalize it. But I think the most important thing for us is if you're spending $4 for every dollar you take in, I mean, I was never very good at math in high school, but that doesn't seem like a very good choice.
Thank you. That's what I wanted you to say because I think the highest.
And honest to God, he did not give me a heads up.
But I think, wasn't it the biggest one in Colorado was a 0.2% on their budget? That's all.
Yeah, it's minimal, very minimal.
Right, very minimal
Yeah, very
to
minimal.
help with the budget.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I thought it was a heck of a seminar. I mean,
we haven't even figured out how to get the lottery money for the schools yet. So I don't know why we would do legalize marijuana.
Anything else for the sheriff? If not,
Thank you.
sure.
Yeah. Anybody else want to put me on the spot?
Mr. Lee, we'll move to the auditor's office. Okay, we need a motion to put the monthly claims on the record. Ms. Parker, Mr. Washington seconds. Any discussion on that? Hearing no discussion, all in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Really, what is it? A roll call on that one? Pay the bills. Pay the bills, okay. Roll call.
Mr. Lear? Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Olthoff?
Aye.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Mr. Byrne?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Excuse me. Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger? Mr. Zenz?
Aye.
Ms. Haas? Mr. Swanson?
Aye.
Mr. Dennell? Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Mr. Lee, what do you have?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Let me begin by just letting folks know that Friday is Walk a Mile in Her Shoes with Casey Casa. So I'd like to invite everyone at noon to the Kankakee Park District's Rec Center to participate in that. Some of you may know that I'm involved with Casey Casa, so would definitely like to invite people to attend. I did want to note that I made a few presentational changes to the claims report. It's much shorter, as you may have noticed, simply because, like I said, some of the presentational changes I made, and then wanted to present some information in the section where we have the charts and so forth. I don't know if you have those in front of you, but with some of the major expense general revenue fund and special revenue funds that we have, so that you can kind of see that those funds generally represent anywhere between 75 and 92% of the monthly expenditures. So I thought it was important to kind of see how those are trending. And so that's presented in there as well. Other than that, just to kind of clarify one of the questions that was asked earlier, what we generally do, and it just dawned on me that we should probably submit the credit card journal vouchers to the Finance Committee as well, because the mileage, so what we've done is what was born out of the last episode about claims that come from me as the county auditor are generally cash disbursements. The last one was that kind of caused a little bit of debate was a $7.32 slice of pizza along with mileage. And so what I decided to do was to bring my claims whenever there's a cash disbursement to me to the finance committee. And we only claim mileage. You know, I don't even do meals or anything like that. And the credit card, so the hotel, the registration is on the credit card. And that's why that's not in this particular packet, because this is a cash disbursement. It's a reimbursement for my mileage for driving my personal vehicle. So we will start submitting those credit card journal vouchers as well. Anything that is from the auditor's office, we'll bring it to the committee. I did not think about that before, so I do apologize for that. So anyway, I can answer any questions that there may be at this time or clarify anything.
Mr. Sin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jake, thanks for coming in and explaining that. I had some quick questions just from, I guess, from an educational standpoint. Maybe you might be able to help me a little bit.
All right. This bill.
Do you have a determined methodology on how you conduct audits yearly? Like, so far I've seen 3 from you. Is there a certain methodology that you use to determine what those are going to be, or even the cumulative amount?
Excellent question. So, correction would be there are 4 published ones out there. Okay. In terms of the methodology, I'll say we go by the statute. The statute tells us what we should audit. Obviously, with the resources in our office, me and one other person, we do what we can. We spend the majority of our time with the administrative things that has kind of been placed on the office with how the claims process works and the enhancements we've made to the reporting with the quarterly report and the claims report specifically, and then the ongoing, the continual auditing activities. Mm-hmm. So to the extent that we are able to perform the internal audits that we have, we perform them.
Okay, and right. Do those statutes specifically identify certain types of audits that have to be conducted in a certain periodicity?
No, they're not that specific. They just say that they shall be audited. There's not a time frame as to when in terms of the periodicity. And to the extent that we audit different things such as our decentralized accounts or any other audits that we do, compliance audits or what have you, we use professional judgment in that regard.
Okay, and those are typically like from, I would imagine you list them out from like most vulnerable to least vulnerable, or in some kind of way.
Yeah, the risk assessment is part of the auditing procedure.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm just familiar with having done that in the nuclear industry, so I just wanted to kind of get some clarity on that.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions?
I had a couple quick questions, I hope.
Mr. Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you, Mr. Lee, I just want to hit a couple questions, hopefully to clarify as we start to migrate accounting into your office for 12/1. I want to make sure that we're at least on point as far as what we're doing and how we're looking at things. So I look at the emphasis of matter because, obviously I'm concerned and also want to make sure that we're compliant in the things that we should be doing. Mm-hmm. The statement is made in there that we neither certify nor attest to the completeness of this report for the period covered. And that's an ongoing statement that's within the emphasis of matter within your monthly and quarterlies. And I'm trying to figure out who attests for the completeness and the of the reporting. I mean, to me, that would be the auditor. And I'm trying to make sure that, are we thinking of this wrong? As far as the information that's in the computer system, as far as the financials, who is supposed to attest to the completeness of it?
Excellent question, Mr. Chairman. So the reason we put that in there is it started last year when there was an email from me where I was inquiring as to why numbers were unusual and unexpected, specifically in the claims report, and I never got a response. And so we have to disclaim things that we don't know what's happening because we do not control the accounting process. That's where that came from, and it'll continue until we have that information.
Well, I'm a little bit confused then, because all financial information is in the computer system, and if an audit trail is established via that computer system, what more do you need to say that these are the numbers, that this is in the system to be able to report on? These monthly reports are based on the numbers that are in the system. So it doesn't, the wherefore and the why to me is not necessarily part of an audit process. Are these numbers accurate?
Well, that's correct. I think when it comes to what's in the computer system, so for example, the stamps that go to the state treasurer or the state of Illinois from the recorder's automation fund, we never see those claims, but they end up in this report. So we have no opinion on that, and so we disclaim that. We have no control over the accounting entries or the process that generates that wire that goes to the state. So we're not going to endorse it in any way. We disclaim it.
Okay, so now we have to try to figure out who is going to audit that going forward, because it does need to be audited by somebody. So we'll address that when we start to go into this on another level. Another question I had is there's been a lot of comments that you feel that you are the controller or act as the controller for the county. And I'm wondering if you could provide the committee, because as we go forward, if that is the case, we want to make sure that we're compliant with that. Where in the auditor statutes does it say that the auditor is the controller for the county?
So that term, you'll notice that I used to frame the position and character is similar to that of a controller. And you can look to, for example, the city of St. Louis, the elected controller there who has an internal audit division and who also does the general accounting for the city of St. Louis. That would be a position that you would look to for an example. It's an easy term for people to understand. It's obvious that the title of auditor gets people confused because they don't, generally speaking, separate external auditing practices, which is where your independency standards with the generally accepted governmental auditing standards come from, and internal audit practices and what's outlined in the state statutes. So that's why I use that term, just so that it's easy for people to kind of grasp, because when you take the compiled statutes and you put the term auditor on it. An example would be historically in the state of Illinois, the Auditor of Public Accounts, which that office was abolished with the 1970 Constitution, was both the Comptroller's office and what is now the Auditor General of the state of Illinois' office. However, the Auditor General does post audits, which makes them the independently appointed auditor, and they opine on the financial statements presented by the Comptroller of the state of Illinois. So that's why I try to differentiate that term.
Okay, and that office is free of any managerial internal responsibilities. It's important to note that as well.
Which officer?
The auditor office in the
the
state.
Auditor General of the state of Illinois, because it is a separate entity and they opine on the financial statements. The internal auditor of a county does not opine on the financial statements. Therefore, we are not independent and we are considered part of management.
Actually, no, the statutes don't say that at all. And that is incorrect to say, and it's incorrect to say that you are the controller for the county. Statutes don't call that out at all. We will disagree on that.
We will disagree, sir.
Okay.
Absolutely.
The question came up earlier as far as like the budgetary change that was made at the end of the year. I'm sure as you have access to the data, you are constantly aware of where you're at in your budget at all times. You were able to pull that report right out of MIP and know where you're at on expense and revenue. I just want to make sure that there's no issue there, because we issue quarterly reports, but you as somebody who has full access to MIP, as far as being able to pull any information out, you have what you need there to look at that.
Yes. So to answer the question, because I think this is leading towards what my comments have been. in the December meeting, as you did note, the schedule was changed. I had a scheduling conflict, which didn't allow me to stay for that whole meeting. As you know, the executive committee meeting went for a little while. I did not know that the committee was going to present a number, so I did not refute that at the meeting, obviously, because I knew it was a fake number as soon as I saw it when I got to watch the meeting later on that day. And I knew I would only have probably about $40 or $50 left in my budget to begin with. So I knew as soon as the budget was reduced that it was reduced by too much. And so when the accounting entries were made and all of that, I did raise that issue. And in my email to the outside auditor, I stated that it was immaterial to the financial statements, but the process is improper because the ability to do that should not even exist without my knowledge, because as by statute, the auditor is the general accountant of the county. And so that was my position on that, and I stand by that position, and that's the explanation.
Okay. So when, you know, you're obviously very aware of the statutes regarding your office and of the county board, and I'm sure that that knowledge is also where it relates to claims and things, kind of goes to all the offices that submit claims through your office, correct? You would have to know their statutes and who has authority and who is available to do certain things through all these other offices. Is that a fair assumption to make?
Well, and those statutes that we may not know or be aware of, we'll certainly inquire of the state's attorney about to give legal guidance. Absolutely.
Well, then, in the spirit of trying to make things better, I just wanted to let you know that, you know, because of the VAC question that has come up in the past, I had to look into their statutes, and I found that all claims that are submitted from the VAC need to be signed off by a superintendent who is also a military veteran that's been duly appointed. And so they do have, I'm hoping you can help me fix this, because in the spirit of working together, we want to get this straight. Since Mike Roof has left, that a person in their office has signed off on their claims, that's not neither a veteran nor the superintendent. So that is a violation of state law, but rather than just try to, you know, call the newspaper and get everybody uptight about everything, can you help me fix that with the VAC and make sure that they have somebody sign it that is the superintendent?
Well, the VAC, as you've stated in other meetings, Mr. Chairman, has their own commission. And their commission, I would suspect, I'm not going to pretend that I can get into the legalities of it, but I would suspect that their commission needs to appoint a superintendent that is a veteran in order to ensure that that doesn't happen. Since their acting superintendent, or whatever the title of the person running the VAC right now is by delegation of the commission, I would assume, signing their claims. You know, from our perspective, you know, those claims have always been, well, I'm going to say, while the VAC superintendent was a veteran, you know, the superintendent signed the claims. Now that it's not a veteran, that's something that'll have to be looked into further. And I'm willing to do whatever I can do to opine on the issue from an audit standpoint, but I think you're getting into legal territory that the state's attorney will need to weigh in on.
Well, I actually won't advocate that to the state's attorney, because the statutes clearly say that it has to be signed off by the superintendent. They do have a superintendent. They have two that have been appointed by the board.
Okay.
And that was duly elected within their committee. And the reason this matters to me is because in the absence of a superintendent, I become the fiscal agent for the VAC.
That's correct.
So I had to look into that to make sure we're doing things right. I don't see anything wrong with them or any illegalities that they're doing. I think it's just a mistake that we need to clear up. And so, but again, to have some statutes matter more than others, where it's the county board statutes that are much more important than everybody else's, I would like to look at everybody equally for the spirit of running things more efficiently and better. And so, no, I did find the claims, I did pull the claims, that is the case. That cannot be delegated from the superintendent to anybody else per the statute. It has to be the superintendent. So that's all we got to do is have them sign the claims. And that's, I'm asking, we could do that in a more private manner, but it seems that everything has to be brought to committee and to the newspapers rather than having discussions like they used to happen in days gone by. So that's all I ask, is maybe we start to address this stuff in a more civil manner instead of here. That would be nice.
I'm okay with that. I know that you could probably agree that you've initiated most of that. So,
Actually, I completely disagree.
okay, we'll disagree there too.
I
Thank you,
completely
sir.
Disagree. Now, as far as the credit card process, somebody cashed in the credit card points. It wasn't me or Mr. McCarty or Anita. Do
It wasn't me.
have any idea who did that?
I have no idea. I expressed that in my email to you.
Correct, right.
Yes.
It's just somebody also canceled Mr. McCarty with the credit card company as employee of the county. Do you know anything about that?
I know nothing about that. I've never canceled
Okay.
any. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, we just got a batch of new cards, which I expressed in an email to you as well. And his card is included in that batch. So as far as I know,
This was 2 months ago, and I inquired about it back then, and nobody seems to know who canceled Mr. McCarty as an employee. I'm not accusing. I'm just
there was no
asking about
inquiry, no inquiry made to me, sir.
Yeah.
None
So-
whatsoever.
They just say that I did it, and believe me, anybody can call as me.
Yeah.
There are proxies that happen out there. So the only thing we need to do is make this better somehow, and you're gonna get accounting on 12/1, and we're developing the policies and procedures to do that. But the gamesmanship has to stop. And you have my commitment, and I think you have the board's commitment to want to do things right. We're the ones who've always tried to make things more transparent and open and broadcast meetings and try to bring things to the forefront. But it seems that we're always being portrayed as the bully and somebody else is being portrayed as the victim. And I would suggest that it's not that way at all. So that's all I have.
Duly noted. Any other questions at all? Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Have a good day, committee.
Thank you. We move to other business. An ordinance establishing civil fees, criminal and traffic assessments to be charged by the clerk of the circuit court. We have a motion to approve on this so that we can open discussion. Ms. Lever moves to approve. Ms. Parker seconds. Okay, we'll be open for discussion. Mr. Graham, what can you tell us on this?
Good morning, everybody. So I believe Judge Cunnington showed up at Criminal Justice to briefly telegraph some of these changes, but the state legislature did change how fees and fines are going to be assessed in our court system, both on the criminal side of things and on the civil side of things, beginning July 1st. So what this ordinance in front of you does is allows the court system to still collect the fees and fines as outlined in those changes. It's a little ambiguous. I'll be upfront about the questions I know is coming about how it will impact the budget and how this all will kind of pan out. I can't tell you. I can't give you a good assessment on that, but I will say I've worked with Sandy and Judge Cunnington as well as Chief Judge Kramer to try and address to the best we could predict the impact this is going to have so that the funds that get funded through this court system hopefully don't have as much of an impact as it might otherwise have been. So I've tried to align what this is going to look like to what currently is going on. But to look any one of you in the eye and say, I know exactly what's going to happen come July 1st, I can't do that. So Sandy is here to answer any logistical questions for her office, but with that, I will take any of your questions.
Mr. Kissinger?
Just a quick question. The changes represented by this document, are mandated by state law changes, is that correct?
Correct. So my understanding about what the intent of the state legislature was is that there was a lot of discrepancy between our county and another county in the state about what's getting collected in what certain cases. So their intent was to try and equalize that across the state.
Any other questions? Ms. Parker? Oh. If there are no other questions, Ms. Weber?
I was just wondering how many numbers have changed. Has every number changed here?
So there is a significant impact on some funds. There's very little impact on others. So I can walk you through what those will be, but the short version is some have been greatly impacted while others have not.
And
One thing that I know Judge Cunnington is particularly passionate about is the teen court fund. That went away in the statute change. I did put throughout the criminal side, which we believe begins on page 7 if you're looking at that, a $5 fund for each criminal case to hopefully maintain the teen court's funding level. That was a choice that Judge Cunnington asked me to put in there. That is a choice this board can, of course, change if they so choose, but there is a little bit of wiggle room and discretion within those 4 or 5 sections there. I can't remember how many sections it is off the top of my head, but.
Mr. Wheeler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To that end, I did receive some communications from some of the lawyers through the Bar Association and through, obviously through the judges, that they would like to see the teen court continue. And obviously we don't have the crystal ball, as you said. We don't know what that's going to generate. These are fees that typically either don't get paid or would get waived anyway.
Correct.
So we can't really expect anything, but I believe we're spending around 30 grand a year for teen court is the rough number I've been given, and we'll check that out. But
that was the rough number I believe Sandy gave me too. Yeah.
And so I would ask that the finance committee may either look at a budget amendment and definitely to put it in next year's budget to continue supporting that endeavor, because it saves us a lot of money in the long run with keeping people back out of the system. So it's unfortunate the state's not a partner in this anymore, but it just is what it is. We have to pick up what we can. So
I will say I fully intend on someone needing to come back in October, November, whether that's me or the finance folks, to assess where we are in terms of reality at that point in time. But best we can do for right now.
Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with teen court too. I think it's certainly something that needs to be supported. Mr. Hess?
Thank you, Chairman. I believe at criminal justice, it was brought up that the state is not losing any money. It's just the local counties that are losing the money. The state kept their share no matter what across the board, correct?
That's my understanding, is the funding is not going to change dramatically for the state, correct?
Thank you.
Mr. Kennedy?
The state usually reacts to cases. Have we looked at adding fees to this document? Because they probably haven't thought through their actions. And so maybe, as you mentioned, the teen court fee, maybe we could have some other fee added to this document.
So the way the statute's written, and there's no cases because it's not been implemented yet, so no one's been able to litigate on it. There are sections, and forgive me, I'll pull up a section if you'd like me to. If you look at page, let's call it 7, at the very top of that page, subsection D, it says $255 to the county general fund to be distributed as follows. Those 6 items, the board has discretion on. I would caution, however, though, that is a good chunk of what the circuit clerk is going to rely on for her operations and her budget that we have right now in the fees currently.
Can we raise those?
We can't raise it over that 255.
Okay,
that's the cap that the statute set. You can move those 6 numbers around to try and get a different allocation within 255, but for that section is 255. It changes throughout, but if you keep going, that section that has 6 or 7 funds, that's where you do have a little wiggle room to change where the allocation is going to be.
We can't add another fund.
You can't add over. I've capped it the best I could. I've obviously tried to minimize the impact, but that's the ceiling that the statute set.
What I'm talking about is like there's a child's advocacy fund of $10.
Right.
Could I have, for communication purposes, a parents advocacy fund $10?
Not unless it's authorized by the state statute,
that's what
which is at this point isn't.
Thank you.
Mr. Washington?
Who constructed this bill?
I will defer to our legislative representative, Mr. Lear. I'm not sure exactly who proposed it or how that process went.
I don't.
I'm just dealing with the cleanup on the back end.
My comment is this: it appears that we're going through the same old thing that we do year after year, with legislators coming up with grandiose ideas about how county government should run without any consideration being given to the people that are going to run county government. That doesn't make any sense, but that's the way it's been functioning for years and years and years, and I'm sick of it.
I completely agree with you, Mr. Washington. I won't speak for who was in the room, but you're probably not wrong.
Any other questions on the motion up before us? As this is an ordinance, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Reluctantly, aye.
Mr. Olthoff? Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Mr. Byrne?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton? Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger? Mr. Zenz? Ms. Haas? Mr. Swanson? Mr. Dennell? Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We move to the Highway Department budget adjustment for Wind Farm road repairs.
Mark, do you want to address that, or you want me to? Right, stay up here. My choice. So, as you're all familiar with, there was the wind farm EDF built, I believe, on the south side of the county. We've been negotiating back and forth with them on the conclusion of that contract for them to repair the roads that they've used throughout that construction process. We've consulted with outside counsel, and the conclusion has been, and Mark can probably better address how that process looked, but the conclusion is that they're just going to write us a check, and Mark and his team are going to do that work. In terms of the funding amount, it's just over $1 million if memory serves, and that should certainly cover his costs to do that project.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes, the settlement was just over $1 million. There was $960,000 for construction. There's some warranty repair work we have to do on the previous phase. There is $58,000 for engineering and $50,000 because they want to have a warranty release. They want us to release them from the warranty of this project. And then they are reimbursing us for our outside legal funds.
Right. So like I mentioned, we did have to consult with outside counsel who, frankly, wrote the original road use agreement when the project began too. And he's been fantastic working with our office as well as Mark. And this is his template, his contract that he wrote up. So it came from our own counsel to write this. So.
And the reason for the budget amendment is I did not have a line item in my county highway fund to spend $1 million on this road work, which we are going to put out for letting here in a couple of weeks. So that is why in my highway improvements expenditure, I only had $100,000 because we normally do construction out of my county MFT and our matching tax fund. So I'm changing that from $100,000 to $1,100,000, and then the revenue side, I didn't have that revenue coming in because I did want the wind farm to actually do the work, but because they're writing us a check, we had to have it come in another account.
Right.
Mr. Kisner?
I move we accept the budget adjustment as presented.
Is there a second? Ms. Parker, seconds. Any further discussion? Ms. Weber?
Thank you. I just wondered how many miles?
Mark, do you have that number?
6 miles for $1 million?
I'm sorry, you need to have that on.
Would you mind saying it again, Mark? Sorry, you want on microphone.
I'm sorry, it was 6 miles.
6 miles.
Any other questions? There are no other. Mr. Sierra?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Graham, the warranty portion of
He's not on mic. 15, Steve.
15, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, Todd, go
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Graham, the warranty portion of the agreement, they're wanting to dissolve that?
Correct.
So these wind farms don't last forever, so when they go to make repairs or have to change a blade or a motor, are we gonna be then responsible for that road work?
Well, if they need to go in there and move significant equipment, they're going to have to come to us again and get a permit, and then probably another road use agreement at that point as well.
Just regular maintenance as well.
For this part, the warranty release I'm talking about is in the road use agreement. When they were supposed to overlay the road, they had a warranty of 2 years for that work.
Correct.
When we go on to the next the settlement agreement, there in the settlement agreement, the part of the road use agreement that stays in place is anything for extraordinary events, recommissioning, and decommissioning. That all stays active after this settlement agreement is signed.
Okay, thank you.
That makes, I'm meddling the two issues a little bit there. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
Mr. Alto?
Can they, thank you, Chairman. Can they be forced to perform? They're deciding that they don't want to, and they'll pay the money. Isn't there a part in the statute that says you have to complete it, or do we want do we want control of how it's completed?
It's not a statutory issue; it's a contract issue, right? So absolutely, we could force the issue. I think The downside to doing that route is just time in court to enforce it and twisting their arm. And there is a certain amount of control that Mark will have in this process that he wouldn't have had EDF been the one to pave the road. So there are benefits.
Yes.
I understand your point, though, but that would just take a lot longer and much more headache for everybody involved.
Just for the record, Mr. Althoff, I did want them to do the work, but because they were not going to do it, like Graham said, it became a time issue because our road's falling apart out there.
Right.
And I got to get it done as soon as possible.
You also got to look at it from, you know, liability standpoints and just, you know, road traffic use and all that. So.
Other questions? If not, roll call vote.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Olthoff?
Aye.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Aye.
Mr. Zenz?
Aye.
Ms. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Swanson?
Aye.
Mr. Dunnell? Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, we move to a contract authorizing the county board chairman to sign an agreement with EDF Renewable Energy.
This is just the next step in that process to sign the actual settlement. We've already kind of talked about already, so.
Any questions on this?
You need a motion.
We need a motion. Mr. Olthoff, Mr. Payton seconds. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion. It's a contract, so.
Let's err on the side of a roll call on this
Yeah,
one.
a roll call vote.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Olthoff?
Aye.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Aye.
Mr. Zenz?
Aye.
Ms. Haas? Mr. Swanson?
Aye.
Mr. Dunnell?
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
The 2017 United Healthcare rebate. Mr. Chairman, would you want to speak to that? Or
Yes, Nina will be the one.
all right.
You have some paperwork in your packets. There's a letter from United Healthcare as well as a little calculation here of a rebate. And what happened with the Affordable Care Act is that healthcare providers have to spend at least 80% of their premiums on actual reimbursement of healthcare costs. In 2017, that's calculated on a state-by-state basis. In 2017, Kankakee County, United Healthcare spent 97% of our premiums on healthcare costs. So it wouldn't have impacted us, except by the law, this is calculated state by state. And United Healthcare in the state of Illinois spent less than 80%. So needed to give a rebate back to all entities that had. We received our rebate, and in total, you can see it was $6,506.61. We received it last October, but I wasn't aware of it until one of our employees went to their accountant who mentioned it and asked about the rebate. So then by the time I called United Healthcare and tracked it all down, this is why I didn't know, because it was $6,500. So by the law, there are Department of Labor regulations that explain how you separate that out. And the county itself retains 75% of that amount because we pay 75% of our premiums. And then 25% of it needs to get rebated back to our employees. So that's $1,626 to our employees that were enrolled in that plan in 2017. There is a Department of Labor regulation or part of their explanation of how to do it that allows that if it costs more to track down and send checks to people that are no longer employees, you don't have to do that. So for a $5.39 rebate, I left those people off. Right, or it'd be slightly less than $5 probably. So the amount that's going to be rebated back to each employee will be $5.39. We're going to do that as a line item, a separate line item on their paycheck, and it'll be taxable income. So
Is there any action this committee needs to take? Mr. Chairman?
I don't know that we do.
I think we should have a motion in a second, because we are spending money on a paycheck, even though it's something that's come in, just to be safe.
All right. We have a motion then to approve this
I'll do it.
rebate. Mr. Zen moves. Mr. Payton seconds. Any discussion on the motion? We're spending money, so it would have to be a roll call vote.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Olthoff? Mr. Hess? Ms. Weber? Mr. Payton? Ms. Parker? Mr. Kinzinger? Mr. Zenz? Ms. Haas? Mr. Swanson? Mr. Dennell? Mr. Wheeler? Motion carries.
Is there any old business come before this committee? Is there any new business come before this committee? Seeing none, Mr. Olthoff, a motion to adjourn. Mr. Hess, a second. All in favor of the motion to adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. We are adjourned.